Everybody, and welcome to our tournament talk episode of the Harry Potter Trading Card Game Revival podcast. I'm Sammy.
I'm Reese, and we have no Huam in this week. Unfortunately, he's away. Is he on holiday?
Yeah, he's off visiting family.
Family, yes. So he's gone overseas and doesn't have great access to internet at the moment. So it'll just be me and Sammy today. So yes, today we are going to go through the February tournament and look at the deck lists we've had there. Quite a diverse tournament, hey?
Yeah, it was really diverse. I liked it. There was only one repeated starter, which was really good. And the rest of the decks, for the most part, were doing pretty different things, which was just really, really nice to see.
Even the duplicate starter was completely different decks as well. So yeah, it was great to see. So the starters we had Professor Hagrid as aggro creatures. We had Molly Weasley tribal.
Quick note from future Sammy that we are calling this a Hagrid aggro deck, but it's more of a Hagrid control deck.
The first of the duplicates is Draco Malfoy Slytherin. That item action economy, really good. But it was a Arthur items slash passwords, I suppose you'd say. The second Draco we had was the good old VTJ. A Lymph make another appearance since the last tournament with passwords
But in a
again.
very different build than what I anticipated.
Yes.
And we'll talk about it, but compared to yours, it was so different.
Yes, very, very different. Then we had Trelawney, very, very shrewd use of her in a mid-rangey creature control, I'd say.
Yeah.
We had Angelina, that was you, right, Sammy, with the spell
Janky
slinger.
as hell. Yep.
Yep,
Awful and janky as hell, but I loved it.
love to see it. A fantastic, probably my favorite deck of the entire tournament is Cadogan.
Yeah, I didn't get to play against it, but what I heard sounds really, really cool. And I'm super excited that Spew went in a direction that was not Hagrid. That makes me very happy.
Or spew in a direction that's not the fat lady as well. So
Yes, true. Yeah.
and then the last one, character control, which was myself.
Yeah, it was a really cool group of decks. We did definitely saw some patterns in the decks, and we'll kind of talk about that after we talk about all the decks, or maybe while we're talking about them. But it was definitely a nice spattering. I really enjoyed the tournament for that spattering of decks and just kind of people trying to do different things. I am sad. I think I was the only person playing Quidditch, which just broke my heart because Quidditch is the best. But you know what? My favorite card was played in at least two decks, so I'm happy about that.
Was it two? Was it?
I think Malevolent Mixture was played in two. Well, because I of course played it, and then
Oh, then yes, it was two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, there you go. The Quidditch thing, there's some things coming. So,
There are,
it
yes.
might see an uptick. It might see an uptick in a very, very different direction than what we used to having for Quidditch. So,
Yeah, it
there are
could.
things coming.
Yeah, I was actually going to play a bumping item deck, and I didn't want to, because I think it was played in the last tournament, I didn't just want to play it right after, but at the same time, I wanted to play it right after because I wanted to refine what was played last year and just like improve it in small ways and see if it could top the tournament again. But I also just wanted to play Angelina because I miss one of the OG starters.
Yes, and of course, coming up as well, we might have some competition for Angelina as the Quidditch starter. So,
Oh, in my opinion, there is definitely competition. We talked about it yesterday. We'll see if that competition actually holds true, but I definitely think she's going to have some kind of competition.
yeah, cool. So, dive straight into the first deck.
Yeah, let's do it. The first deck was a Professor Hagrid aggro creature deck, but it wasn't aggro creature. It was weird. So it was a transfig creature deck, which is pretty typical, right? Like that is one of the top decks that we see is just like a transfig creature deck because you get the consistent damage and then you also get the control piece that you really need in this game. So this deck ran Corridor as kind of like one of the key pieces.
Well, I'd also want to say that I think when people think of Transfiguration creatures, the thing they'd probably first think of is maybe picking on Neville as well, but Steel Claws, and this does not
Steel
have the
Claw.
Steel Claws.
Yeah. When we started talking about this, like prepping for this podcast, I looked at the list and I was like, wait, there's no Steel Claw. But I feel like Steel Claw wants to win rather quickly, and the corridor strategy wants to drag out the game and do more of like a slow burn situation. And playing against this deck, it was definitely a slow burn situation for me, and
Yes,
it
it
was
was.
painful as hell.
I got a little bit luckier with the characters playing no lessons out onto the board, so the corridor not as effective against my deck, luckily. But I can see how most of the decks in this tournament would have been a bit exasperated by this
It
one.
was a struggle. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
struggle. Well, and so the whole idea behind the deck is you play Corridor and Hermione's Time Turner. And so before your turn, you're going to discard a lesson to Corridor. Hagrid will trigger, returning the lesson to your hand and letting you draw a card. And then you use Time Turner to put the lesson back into play. So you get this loop of just discard card, bring a lesson back, draw a card without ever losing cards on board. And you actually go up a card in your hand. So you're just constantly kind of up, and your opponent is just struggling to kind of counteract that, which I think is why it's so effective. Now, if you can just get a location out, you can stop it. But the issue was I was getting up to like 4 or 5 power by the time this combo thing was coming down, and I was playing Chamber of Secrets. And every time I would get up to like 5 or the 6 power, I would have to discard the lesson because I wasn't playing many other permanents. And then I could never get the 6 power or the 5 power to stay long enough for me to be able to play Chamber. So I was never able to break out of that loop, which was just unfortunate timing for me.
And we talked about it prior to the podcast recording as well, how the whole situation with those 3 cards set up, they really play into each other. I think you talked about how you don't like that sort of set up an engine, get free economy from it. And I'm kind of the opposite. I think setting up engines is a very, very fun way to play games. But I think the part that you didn't mention when we were talking about originally is the engine is there and exists for the player, but then it heavily taxes the opponent, which I can see as the really depressing part of that whole free setup, where it's making something that should be symmetrical unsymmetrical. And the thing that is unsymmetrical is really bad for the opponent.
Yeah, because like I don't mind that free like stuff and things. For example, the Wit Sharpening Suite from Goblet of Fire, I think is a really cool suite. Yeah. And like you can pair that with Crab and Goyle, Draco Malfoy, whatever, and you can get a lot of advantages. And like I think that's fine to have those free triggers. I think it's the continuous loop that is set up, and I think that is more of the issue. And I actually think when we had released Hagrid, I don't remember, and I could be wrong, but in test playing, anybody having found the interaction between Corridor and Hagrid. But shortly after it came out, I think somebody built a deck, and we were all just like, wait, what? And we just missed that interaction during test playing and design, which just shows that like we think that we get everything, but then somebody, builds a deck, which is what you all should do, is build decks that break what we design and really push what we design to the limits and make a really interesting thing that we just did not think of. And so I think had we caught that earlier, we probably would have adjusted Hagrid to probably not do this, but it is what it is and it's here, so we got to play with it.
Yeah, I mean, building new sets, you got 80 cards, just considering all the interactions between every single card. There's like 80 factorial different interactions you could possibly have. And that's just within the set that you're designing, let alone all the outstanding sets. So there's a lot of things that we could miss because it's not something you typically think of. Obviously, building Hagrid, you're only thinking of the creature interaction and not what all the other colors do necessarily. So,
Well, and so there are 2 cards from this deck I do want to mention real quick. One is Banned Item List, and that really just works super well in this deck because it taxed all of your opponent's cards with a power cost. So if they were discarding their lessons for Corridor, for example, well, now they're down that lesson plus the 1 taxed from Banned Item List. So that was just a really great interaction. Good job to the deck creator for doing that. And then the second thing I thought was just really funny was I believe this person might have lost to the Quidditch item bumping deck in the last tournament. I don't remember what that was exactly, but No Time to Play is in the sideboard, which is just a card that discards all of your opponent's Quidditch cards from play. And I think that's hilarious that is like being sideboarded a little. I love that it's being sideboarded, but it made me chuckle.
Yeah, maybe the next tournament make its way out of the list again, but
possibly,
definitely. Yeah. And the second one we have is Molly Weasley Tribal. I think this one is basically a character control deck, Potions Transfigurations. I think the Molly Weasley is made mainly around getting out the Ron as a replacement for a Ron starter, really, and trying to use that. It's pretty good because you can also get Bill now, and then I think with Arthur rounds it out with the Weasley clock to have a sort of a win condition.
I played against this deck a lot prepping for this event, really just in like casual games, and if you can get Ron out turn 1, the rest of the deck just starts to hum so well, and you just use Molly, and then you get one last action to play the character with Ron, and it really, really works well. And if you can get Weasley Grandfather Clock out on turn like 4, 5 maybe at the latest, and you have Arthur, which is also searchable with your starter, you can just start hitting people for 11, and it just hums well. It need more pieces. It's definitely not like top tier, but it's definitely getting there.
Yeah, and quite a lot of other character support, I suppose, once you've got that Ron, which is searchable, pretty consistent, but a little front-end action intensive, but it helps out with a wider range of all the other characters, right? So then you play your normal suite of like Seamus and then Quirrell and Snape, McGonagall, all those sort of interactive bits.
Yeah, and there are also 2 cards I want to point point out with this deck too that I thought were interesting. One is main decked Rita Skeeter. Do you think she's going to become just a staple character card at this point? Because I think she's been in, think she was in your deck. She's
Yes.
in this one, and then she was also in two or three of the character decks from the last tournament too.
Yeah, look, yes, my gut feeling is I think she will become a staple in these character decks. I see her as the main win con, really. I think Grip Hook is sort of a one and done, or you have to get a bit more clever with magical mess remover and recycling Hannah Rabbits and stuff like that to finish off. But this is just a consistent, you get it out, and I think we'll see when some of
Yeah.
the tournament videos are put on YouTube, we'll see you're consistently doing somewhere between 6 to 10 damage with her per turn, which is really good and consistent. So I think she'll definitely be here to stay, with one little asterisk next to that with a card coming out in the next set, which will definitely be played.
Agreed. Yes, I think that's going to be a great addition to this deck. I'm super excited to see how that card works in the deck. But yeah, I agree. It's going to get a great addition.
If this one card we're talking about is manageable, where Rita is not an overextension of the character deck, then yeah, I think she will be here for forever now, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think giving them another way to kind of win and play is fantastic. I think I played against this the second round of the tournament, as well as all the test games I played, and I was running Mistbrewed Polyjuice, which is one of my favorite cards. And it got to a point where they had Arthur and Rita in play, and they also had the Weasley grandfather clock. So I could use Mistbrewed on Rita or Mistbrewed on Arthur and do a crap ton of damage because there were just so many characters. But then it left the other character free to do damage back to me. So I got into this moment where like I could take care of half of the problem, but the other half of the problem was just as bad, and I couldn't do anything about it. And it was hard. So yes, that this upcoming card from the next set will hopefully resolve a lot of that stuff. And it's in my color, so it works out great.
Yes, hopefully it's a fair back and forth,
Yeah.
and not so one-sided, but it will definitely be a consideration. But I think Rita, as opposed to Grip Hook as the finisher for the character, not only is she more consistent middle sort of range of damage, but that's fairer in my eyes, doing 7, 8, 9 damage per turn, where your opponents have a few turns to sort of interact and decide how they're going to deal with her, or the character strategy in general, as opposed to sort of like, oh, Grip Hook maybe gets fired off, and if it does get fired off, it ruins everything. So
the last card I want to point out from this deck is Neville Longbottom as a sideboard character. I believe Neville was also sideboarded in the last tournament in the deck that won, I think. And we're just seeing him more often as a sideboard piece. And I never really thought Neville was good. We've never really seen like mass play with him, but he's popping up on a more consistent basis in decks. I don't think he's going to start being like an included in every deck kind of character, but he's definitely becoming a somewhat more popular character to sideboard, which is a fun place for the dorky little guy.
yes, yeah, definitely. I think good as a cap against the higher end damage cards.
So we'll talk about the DMS decks last, but let's talk about a deck that you played last tournament, but is very, very different now.
Yeah, a lymph. So the list for this one is password control
Wild.
shell. Yeah.
Like OG password control.
Yeah, so playing Charms and Transfiguration. I think Transfiguration obviously pretty staple for anything that wants to be control-y. You have Stairs to Slides picking on Neville. So that sort of thing will pretty much always see Transfiguration now. Lost Notes. But then obviously it has the password, so it has to be playing Charms.
Yeah, and like that's the crazy thing to me about this is it's playing Wattlebird, Sherbet Lemon, and Pureblood, which if your opponent guesses the correct one and you like play it face down, they take no damage. If they guess the correct one, you take 8. So what's crazy is that even if they guess wrong, they still take 3 damage from the starter, which is just not the way. Again, going back to what I said about Corridor and Hagrid, like people building a deck that is just not what I thought the starter was going to be used for and wasn't like even on my radar. This was hilarious to me and I loved it. I don't know if the deck did really well or not or whatever, but I just think that this little like interaction is hilarious and fantastic.
Yes, it's kind of a weird one, right? I suppose, I mean, as a statistics person, you'd look at this and you'd go, cool, if I play 10,000 password cards, I'm on average doing, what, 2/3 of 11 damage with a lymph out now? So they are 8 damage spell?
See, like just talking about it is just wild, but like
I mean, that's not even correct. I mean, what is it? No, mitigates the damage and makes her. I don't know, makes them all do statistically 6 damage. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
I
it's
should have
something.
prepared this first before trying to spew out the numbers. But
No, it's just wild that this kind of worked because the deck went 2-2. Like it's just wild. It
yeah.
just makes me
So
happy. Like I have nothing really to say about it other than like this deck made me happy.
I suppose the only thing I would say about is one. I don't know how well it did. I've not actually looked at where it placed, but as far as the like a deck building traditional guidelines, you'd sort of say that the passwords using Madam Olymp, you'd look at it probably as the passwords are the deck strategy. And Olymp is like a fail-safe almost, right? So they've chosen to play passwords and they've gone, what is the starter I would use for passwords rather than gone, I'm choosing to start Madam Olymp. What is the cards I want to play? But traditionally speaking, you'd say you try and not always have two main strategies of your deck be nombos, which is non-combos for people who don't know the term, where they sort of only work if the other one doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
It's
like
sort of like
the
you're building to fail almost, which I don't know if it turned out to be the case.
But like that's the crazy thing is like even if your like password failed, the fail safe still was at least advancing the game. I don't know. I just thought this was fantastic. I was really happy with this. And I agree it's weird that they were like, what is the best starter for passwords? And that's why I think she was chosen. But I don't know. This was just a great deck. Like I love janky weird things that may or may not work, and this fits squarely into that box. And like kudos to this deck. This is probably my favorite deck of the tournament because it's so freaking weird and because it makes passwords kind of work.
Yeah, I would love to see this played again. Like we get a lot of like one-off decks, like me playing Madam Olymp in the last tournament, for example, where that don't really stick around and get defined. I would love to see, just from a curiosity point of view, with how the math works out or how the strategy should work. I'd love to see this refined and played again, just to see if does the strategy need adjusting. Maybe you only ever play one password per turn because
Yeah.
if you get the second one going, then it's not worked very well. That sort of thing, you know? Like, yeah.
Well, and so I
Well,
think I think the passwords are interesting too because there's this huge like psychological piece to it all where playing against passwords is stressful as hell because you're just like I need to guess the right one and it can change every time or it doesn't change every time and like there's just this added like mental component to playing against them. And I've always like thought it's just funny as hell and like whenever I played against it people just laugh at it, but there is this people always say that there's like, this additional stress having to guess the correct card all the time. And I just think this deck is fantastic.
very, very fun, to say the least.
Probably not fantastic, like amazing to play like as a like a top tier deck, but I just love it. So another deck started Trelawney, which I love that somebody was starting her, and I think that she is a really great starter. I think finding a way to really abuse her scry ability for the top of the deck is probably the most difficult thing, and why she probably hasn't seen huge starter play up until this point. I think probably one of the main things I've seen people do with her is like a no hands Quidditchy thing, and then also like palmistry or some of the divination cards, but it's never anything that's like super consistent, powerful, or whatever. It's just kind of like there. And I feel like this deck is also in that same realm where like it's not doing anything super powerful, but it's still existing. It's still kind of there. It's just not that top tier deck.
Yeah, I played against this one as well. I think the greatest use of Trelawney here was the four of unicorn foals. So essentially with Trelawney, it was quite, I don't know, 80-90% of the time even, they were just unicorns, but, 3 turns early or three lessons earlier, rather. So it used Trelawney to quite a good effect there. And I found myself fretting on the last action of my turn. Okay, I'm about to be up against 4 or 5 uninterrupted actions. Like, what am I having to prepare for? What decisions can I even make with the characters I have where I can sort of prepare for 5 actions right there in front of me my opponent's about to have? It was just, I think a lot of it was control and not a lot of finish in the deck. So it would be great to see this one refined because I went into every opponent's turn scared, but come out of every opponent's turn going, oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
I didn't play against the deck. I just saw the deck list. Kind of similar thoughts to you just looking at the deck list. Trying to get Trelawney to proc the foals is an interesting choice. And we weren't sure if the foals were going to do much. So it's cool to see that like they're trying to do something with them. But I kind of agree with you. Like there's not that great finisher at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you could play it with a bit more creature focus. The control theme, obviously the foals don't do damage either, so there are
Yeah.
just this extra action piece, which is absolutely fine because each one of them were probably giving you 4 or 5 actions over a game.
Yeah,
So
which that itself is good.
which is quite significant. And I think the deck needed a little bit of refining to make use of them. A lot of the use was setting your opponent back, but then waiting probably too long to introduce
Yeah.
your own finisher. The worst thing for me is one of the finishers was, I suppose, the only finisher almost even looking at the list now was Slytherin's Basilisk, which is particularly good
Yes.
against the creatures because it was eliminating my creatures, my characters, particularly good against characters, and was slowly eliminating my characters one by one. And I really had to choose and time when I was going to quirrell the Basilisk back to the hand,
Yeah.
which was a really, really fun interaction. Like that was, no, you know what? I take 6 more damage. I give the Basilisk one more turn. I can set up other stuff around it, and then I'll have 3 actions on my turn with Seamus or something like that to like push through a little bit more of what I need to do. So that was really good because it was also okay if it hits Snape, then that cuts off my access to potions, and I can't play I was main decking 4 of Leaky Cauldron, which is a location, and this was playing Azkaban, and obviously that really hurts characters because it stops you playing them at all. So it's like, okay, if he turns off Snape, he's going to turn off my access to potions, which means I won't be able to play characters anymore. And I've got to figure out a way around that sort of thing. So it was very fun, as in the 3 or 4 turns with that Basilisk out, me figuring out what I needed to do and when, getting that timing really correct. But if it had a second finisher, something else that was putting on pressure, I definitely would have potentially panicked or be panicked into pulling that trigger too early. With only the Basilisk to worry about, it didn't feel over the top. So
Yeah, and I like the Basilisk did something in a tournament. I think that we probably could have designed it a little better than we did, but getting it to see some play is always a cool thing when an Air of Slytherin card gets to do something. So I'm glad that it put a little bit of pressure on you in a very flavorful way.
And I definitely think if characters stick around a bit more, that will be something that appears if those mid-range or higher-end creatures start getting a bit more competitive support.
Yeah, hopefully with the next set, there is going to be that for creatures. We'll have to see how that plays out, but I think both of us are hoping it's going to be there for creatures, at least a little bit.
At least a little bit.
So the next deck we can chat about is my deck, actually, and there's not really much to say. It's a very typical chamber trick package. It starts Angelina and wants to get a match for the extra action every turn, and then just play some spells and use Chamber of Secrets. 2 of my games, I just could do almost nothing. Most of my games, I had 8 ways to get matches, either between matches themselves or like Quaffle or World Cup tickets or something. For 2 of my matchup, so 4 of my games, I didn't see a match until turn like 6 or 7. I didn't even see like a way to search for a match until that late, and I should have seen it before then. So like I was just kind of playing catch up to stuff because my deck does better with 3 action. So I just kind of got fucked over, which is what it is. I didn't expect it to be an awesome deck. I just wanted to play Quidditch and not play items, and so we landed here.
I'm looking at the list. We didn't play each other, so
We did not know. Yeah.
No, I can't comment too much on that. But I'm looking at the list, and I think I mean it's pretty standard for what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's an Angelina burn list, so it's cheap spells mainly that do
Yeah.
damage and sort of push or pull on the action economy for you and your opponent in some way. I think, I suppose, looking at the list, you have 1 World Cup ticket, 4 3-month-long match, and 2 muddy practice. And I would say that probably does feel a little low for me, especially considering you don't run the searching for the snitch, do you?
Yeah, no. So I
Yeah.
had 6 matches, Quaffle, and then tickets. I think I initially had like
Oh,
2
Quaffle,
or
yeah.
3 more match searching cards, but I was like, that's 8. Like I should by turn 2 at least have a match. And it was like turn 5 or 6 for half of my games, and it just was not happening, which is what it is. I'm excited about matches coming up. We'll talk about this later a little bit too. But like as you said, and we talked about this deck almost exactly on the podcast a week or 2 ago, where we talked about just kind of this low spell slinger kind of deck and how the cards just don't really give you enough for playing them. And I think that I would agree with just in general, like low cost Quidditch spells just don't necessarily give you enough on their own. And we'll talk about kind of what we've seen as patterns after this tournament later, but like the top decks being some type of character deck, some type of aggro creature deck, and then some type of combo-y deck. And this is none of those top tier like types of decks. And I think that was obviously very apparent because I played against a lot of decks that fit into those categories. And there was very obviously one deck that was strong and one deck that was just kind of existing.
Yeah, as we talked about in that podcast as well, I think the general gist of the game is that given all the card draw and all the actions throughout a standard number of turns, there is a target number in general that you have to aim for to be able to completely kill an opponent. And that number is it's made a lot more difficult for spell slinger decks than it is for combo decks or something if there is something that extends that number past the expected value. So typically we found that number to be about 45.
Yeah.
You need to do somewhere in the realm of 45 damage. Obviously, if you do more than that, it's irrelevant. If you're playing a burn deck or a creature deck, 45 tends to be, plus or minus 5, that number. But with the Spellslinger deck, any sort of healing from, say, a Pomfrey, healing spell even, and then we also have now the House Elves or Snape even. The extra that adds can be quite debilitating for a Spellslinger deck because it's no longer about action economy when they've run out of spells and they need to start drawing them and, oh no, I draw a lesson instead of a spell and I've wasted my turn. They've recovered now and they can finish out the game where the Spellslinger deck can't. So I don't know if we talked about this last time. We might have, but the space for that might be maybe we help the Spellslinger decks out with getting some healing prevention, or temporary healing prevention. So you can be a bit more clever about when you play that sort of thing and stopping your opponent from being able to put that number out of reach of you.
Yeah, I think everything you said is definitely incredibly true for these small spell decks. And when we design new sets, I don't think that we really think about, in particular, this type of deck. Like the upcoming set has very specific things that it is going for. The set that will come after that, we have kind of the 3 main mechanics for it. It's also not really going to focus on this area. But I think because the game really does have many different avenues that you can choose to go down, depending on your play style and what kind of flavor for Harry Potter that you want to include in your deck. This is just one that we don't naturally support very well, and we'd have to be much more intentional about it, which is fine. I'll just play my Quidditch stuff because I enjoy Quidditch, and that'll be
we'll get it there.
Be good enough. Yeah,
we'll get it there eventually, Sam.
Yeah, maybe one day.
We can get you over the line, win you a tournament.
That's the dream. Let's dive into your deck, then we'll do the Spew deck because that's going to be a cool deck. I mean, both of them are cool.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that caveat extra added to the end there. Yes, so mine is a standard character control deck. The starter now being Snape. So obviously we have Ron cannot be a starter, and he was pretty much the default for the character decks. He makes them all 1 action instead of 2, which playing 2 characters a turn instead of 1 character a turn is a big benefit for these decks. So my initial reaction was, I want to start Ron, so I'll start Snape and just stuff my deck with as many of the character cost reduction cards as I can. So I'm running full 4 of Lockhart's Haircare and Leaky Cauldron. And if I don't draw any of them, Bill Weasley to first turn Bill Weasley and go get them.
Yeah, so you're running 4 Haircares and 4 Leaky Cauldrons, which is 8 cards to reduce it, which, what's that number that you need to get to really make your deck work? 8, 10, etc., whatever. And I think it's fascinating that you're playing Leaky Cauldron because people tend to really avoid that. I have not seen many tournament decks play it. I love that you did play it because I think it is a good card. And obviously there was one other big character deck in the tournament and that's it. So it didn't really hurt you that much.
One game I think was the only time my opponents ever got benefit from it, and to great effect, I would say, but probably overall irrelevant. I would have lost that game, I think, anyway, just because the nature of the 2 decks that are up against each other. But yes, the deck is running as many of those as it can, or as least as best as practically possible, as many of those as we can. So if there was a 8 cost location that did the same thing, I'd probably not run that. I am trying to get the effect out turn 1 or turn 2, so it definitely low cost or nothing. But yeah, so much so that I also run 4 Bill Weasley to make sure if I don't get it with one of those in my opening hand, I hopefully have Bill. And if I don't have it in my starting hand, I mull my hand. I will take that mulligan
Yeah.
and gamble at it again. And that, I think, out of how many games did I play? We've been 10 games in total. Only 2 of them weren't in the opening hand.
Which is fantastic, and which is exactly what you want to see happen too.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think out of those 8 as well, 2 of those would have had to be in a first turn build go get the card. But
Yep.
as far as the consistency around getting it, yeah, definitely 8 to 12 copies of the cost reduction worked really well.
And it looks like you are using Colin and Griphook or Rita as kind of like your win cons.
Yeah, I would say less Colin. I think I had Colin, Godric, and Seamus as the engine of the deck. So that's to find all my characters. There is 17 unique characters in this deck, main
Wow.
board. Yeah, so that's a quarter of the deck is unique characters. But Seamus, Colin, Godric are the main engine of getting actions and basically cycling through my deck to try and find whatever piece I need next, with Griphook and Rita being the finishers. So Rita is consistent damage with this many characters and such a wide array of them. Doing, 7-8 damage per turn with Rita is pretty likely, and Griphook as a good finisher or even disruption. I had that a few times where I Hogwarts a history on board and I return it with the Quirrell, and then Griphook discards it, like removal combo, that sort of thing.
No, yeah, it's great. And I think it
Yeah.
just shows the strength of characters, and characters really give you a lot of the pieces you need to like have a functioning effective deck. And they just work so well together. Like they just do the thing super well, whether intentionally or unintentionally in the original design and then our design. They really just work super well together.
There's a large amount of them that just fit together like a puzzle. You do have like Argus and Draco Malfoy as like coverage for interaction with your opponent, or the Quirrell as well, bouncing items and creatures back to your opponent. So you've got a lot of interaction and ways to choose what to do with your opponent, which is really, really, really good for making a fun and interesting deck to play. And then now with Rita, I think Griphook by himself was maybe a little lackluster, but Rita has really rounded out it as a less gimmicky way of playing the deck. I think we've had the Oliver Quidditch team was the previous one played, and obviously characters can be interacted with. I think because you have to set up a board that can't be broken to try and win, whereas Rita is more consistently just putting that damage out. And if you lose her, there's lots of ways to get her back, where you can use her effect and slowly chip away at your opponent the turn you play her even. So with the Oliver deck, it's a lot more fragile, at least is what I think I saw from that. So this one worked really well. I think there's a few more tweaks to come, and there's cards from the next set that are coming as well, I think will really help out its weaknesses. I am definitely going to keep playing this deck, and probably in a similar configuration to what it is now.
Yeah, I would love to see it refined even more after the next set and to see what you do with it. I do think it's neat that you started Professor Snape. Usually character decks don't start Snape, but we've just seen other starter characters before, whether it's Molly, whether it's Hermione Spew with like Fat Lady or something. Usually it's not Snape. So that was a cool starter choice too.
Yeah, definitely. I went with a math background. So I went with a statistical point of view of the deck rather than a hard, well, I'm going to force my way to get that one action per character thing. I went with you know what? I think you can design a deck that will get there often enough that it will be good enough. And in fact, even better, because you don't have to be so action intensive with the Fat Lady, go search Ron and then play Ron on the next turn. And then, you turn 3 before you're playing your characters out efficiently, where I can turn 1, play Hair Care, Seamus, Colin, and I'm off to the races.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I also just love Professor Snape as a starter. While he may be the second or third, or maybe he's in fourth or fifth at this point in terms of like top professor starters, I just really enjoy him as a starter. So I was happy to see that. But probably what is the most interesting deck, mainly because of the starter and then the way the starter was used, is a Hermione Spew founder deck starting Cadogan, which is a knight from Prisoner of Azkaban or Echoes of the Past that essentially cares about you playing even costed cards and then gives you, I believe, a draw and a lesson into play when you play even costed cards.
Yeah, like advantage and then ramp as well. I suppose you could say it's ramp if you were playing if the even cost was a spell or card that got you power at the same time. So I think I remember when Cadogan first came out, we had a few people that were like, I wish this was a starter. I wish I could build around this. Because it was just such a unique and interesting building restriction to have as a starter. It was a kind of a disappointment at the time that You couldn't, I
Yeah,
suppose. But now with Spew,
you
we have
can.
it. Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
So I think back then there was Cadogan decks going around trying to play, I think, Potions Quidditch
possibly. Yeah.
as a way to ramp with some of the Quidditch ramp spells or something like that. And I'm not too sure what the success looked like for that back then, but this time around it's gone pure potions, I believe.
Yeah, which was everything about this deck just kind of surprised me. Yeah, the pure potions build, starting Cadogan, like all of it was just like, what is going on? But it did really well, and it was
It
just like
did, yes.
crazy. Yeah, I love it. It's just fantastic. Yeah, the mono potions was definitely not what I thought was going to happen.
And there's a lot of, I suppose, the main win condition here is just burn damage, but in a tempo sort of way, right? So it's
Yeah.
trying to play cheap cost cards that will get it into the space it wants to be to finish off the opponent with burn spells. But those cheap cost cards are tempo cards that are trying to prevent your opponent from making efficient action use in their early turns. So they're behind, you're sort of moving forward, and then you finish before they really can go anywhere, I suppose is the intention there, right?
Yeah, it just worked really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just surprised. And my favorite card is in the deck, Malevolent Mixture. Always love when people play that. Although I think that costs 5, which is odd, not even.
Which
But
I
I
suppose
love
it
it
doesn't
anyway.
matter then, right? Because you've set up the rest of it. If it's finishing off, you don't. If you're about to win the game, you don't need it to make use of
Yeah,
Cadogan because you've then won, right? So
true.
I think it's a good call because it is a cheap
Yeah.
spell that uses the lessons that Cadogan would have out. So yeah, I still think it has. I think it has a spot. Obviously, it's only the two of as well instead of a full 4 play set, so that makes sense.
And Dog Breath, which just takes care of creatures, Azkaban, some healing stuff, 12 Years in Azkaban, which I think is one of the best cards that we've designed. So
Yes.
happy to see that being played. Just a whole bunch of cool things. And I'm like, the deck was just really cool. It was inventive, it was very new. I just really, really liked it. I do think it's interesting that they played 3 copies of the Knight. So they started
Yes.
one and then 2 backups essentially.
Yes, I also made note of that. I did play against it, and I did remember them discarding Cadogan at some point for whatever
Oh,
reason it was. Not from play, but from their hand for something. I can't remember exactly what caused that.
gotcha.
Oh, maybe it was when I grip hooked them or something. But yeah, I remember, and I was quite surprised to see they must be quite reliant on that if it gets discarded.
Well, yeah, and I think about
A
past spew
card or
decks,
something.
and past spew decks in tournaments have not ran like multiple copies of whatever they're choosing to start. This, I think, is the first tournament deck we've seen that does this. It was just a
Yeah.
very interesting deck building choice. Glad they did it because that's super cool, but it was just interesting.
And I mean, the Knights aside, I don't know if that is the correct call or not. As far as we know, it might actually be a good thing to have that backup if your deck is built around
Yeah,
that so heavily. I feel like there is potential for this to be refined. I don't know what it is.
I've I've got an idea.
You've got an idea. Okay, that's
Yeah,
that's a good thing to hear because there are a few one-ofs in here, a few two-ofs, and a few three-ofs. So to me, that it's not screaming adjustment required, but that's sort of the thing I lean in towards, especially as it's not a toolbox deck, right? It's not
yeah.
I can have a bunch of one-ofs because I have access to all of them and I can decide on what I'm trying to do, whatever is required at the given time. Like my character deck is, it did play out more like a spell slinger deck in a way where
Yeah.
you're sort of trying to play good quality cards at a good curve or on a good curve. And that to me is sort of indicative of trying to play the most number of copies of each of the good cards rather than ones and twos and threes ofs.
I agree. And I think there's definitely some more synergy that can be made if you just replace some of the odd cards with even. Like Cauldron Calamity, I think it's hard because Cauldron Calamity, even though it's odd, it does discard your potion lessons from play and turns them into damage. So like as a late game card, which was how it was designed to be, if Cadogan is just putting all these lessons into play the entire game, and then like turn 9, you're like, I'm gonna play this, discard them all, and do like 20 damage or whatever it is. It has synergy, but it doesn't. So much about this deck is so interesting. It's just a
Yeah.
really cool deck.
Yeah. So onto the Dracos. We had 2 copies of Draco Malfoy in the tournament, being the premier item deck dot JPEG sort of starter. The first one being the Wadawazi deck.
So the idea, I think, is to get the action economy through Draco, and then use stuff as Lucius's Cane for a little bit of damage here and there, Arthur for some damage with Arthur's ability, and then this is actually a combo deck. I think it's the Rise and Fall of Dark Arts as a potion card. So when you play it, you take, I think it's 2 damage damage. And then when it's discarded from play, you do 6, I think it is, to your opponent. So you play Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, and then you play Wadawasi, discarding Rise and Fall, which does 14 damage to your opponent. So the idea is to use those 2 cards repeatedly, I would assume, which is why you have like a Brass Scales to get back the Rise and Fall of Dark Arts. And then if you don't have Wadawasi, you just use Arthur and you just hit them for 6 damage with an action with Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts. There's a lot happening with this deck. It's mainly, I think, focusing around the Rise and Fall with Wadawasi, but there's also Broken Item, which is the classic Arthur and then do 12 damage with Arthur. And you could also discard Broken Item to Wadawasi, which I think then is only 15 damage, so it's 1 more than Rise and Fall, but like that's kind of a backup. But really relying heavily on Wadawasi.
Yes, yeah. So it's a main focus of the deck. Arthur, I suppose, it'd also be quite good.
Yeah, as long as your opponent in this tournament, nobody played Arthur, but
Yep.
if they did, you would have been a little screwed there. I don't know if 3 Wadawasis was the right number or if you should play 4 because it's such an integral part to like finishing the game.
Yeah, I suppose that's a aspect of deck building. I think needs some tuning always, right? Because
Yeah.
the main aspect of this is people are concerned with like, oh no, I'm going to have too many of them in my hand. But the thing to consider is, do I have access to it when I need it? And if it is the mainstay of your deck, you need access to it all the time. So the offset of having 4 copies versus say 2 or 3 would be that you get a lot more benefit out of making sure you always have access to it versus the hindrance that maybe having an extra copy more than what you need would be. I would like to see sort of how it does play out, because obviously I did that in my own deck where I'm like, no, I am so reliant on having characters cost 1 action. I'm going to play 12 of the card, and that worked out very well for me. But still, probably because it is not as something you need turn 1, for example. It is later on that you need access to it, so maybe it's okay at 3 still.
And I think this deck and this idea, I've played in a couple of like test games with people, and it's definitely like budding, it's getting there. And I think like the core of it is kind of there, like a Wadawasi, a Rise and Fall, Arthur, Broken Item, probably Self-Stirring, Brass Scales. But then it's just kind of like, what do you put around all of those components of it? And like this deck has some of the other components. I think like the Cane was a really good idea because Draco should give you that extra action. So it's just a lesson that's doing a passive 2 damage a turn, more or less. And then Neville with some protection. So like it's got a lot of good pieces. I think it just needs, as we've said about a couple of these decks, be refined in just a couple of little ways. And I think it would be like super strong and be a really cool deck to play against and with. It's like right there. It just needs a few changes.
Yeah, just a little bit more to focus on what it's doing rather than be distracted by the flashy utility of some cards or the power of something that you don't need that power of all the time.
Yes, exactly. This Draco Malfoy deck was actually quite different than the other Draco Malfoy deck because while this one really was like a true item deck, I think, like really items more than anything else, the other Draco deck, while it still had many items, I really wouldn't call it like an item deck. It was a combo deck. It was a VTJ combo deck.
It's still VTJ. It's the good old VTJ as well, with the Dobby's help included in the main board.
Yeah, and like this VTJ combo deck is placing in the top 2 of the tournament. So it's definitely still a strong thing and holding its ground and whatnot. I think we also talked about one of your favorite decks on the previous podcast episode was also VTJ combo. And like
and with Malfoy as the starter, it is one of the few decks I have actually built in real life cards.
There's
from the
definitely
05.
It's a good deck. Like it holds up for a reason.
Obviously, Justin won the tournament. The combo deck has obviously been quite consistent, and VTJ particularly throughout the years. I mean, you only need a few cards, and there's a lot of recursion in this main board here. So you've got the Hannah, you've got a Snape as a healing, you've got Holiday with Hags to get back your potions, Hogwarts of History is main board, 4 copies of. So the aggro, like sort of discarding or damage from the creatures from Ben's deck, maybe not so much of a hindrance when the card combination relies on only a few cards and lots of recursion in the main board to get them out. It's quite consistent, perhaps, not watch the games in entirety. The strength of only needing Dobby's help or a couple Collins with a grip hook and a VTJ just means it's quite easy to pull off, really.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about with getting pieces back from your discard pile, I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the whole like trifecta of like combo versus aggro and whatnot is just like overarching deck types. Yeah, this is a combo deck, but as you said, like it can just bring everything back when facing an aggro deck and then just have the pieces it needs. So by playing against this with an aggro, you're kind of just filling their discard pile with all the pieces they need. You're taking away a step from them having to like search their deck for it and whatnot. So I think that's why this combo deck was able to just overrun the creature aggro deck so well because it was being fed all of its win cons. Then it just won.
Yeah, I mean, we've restricted VTJ to one with the intention of making it less consistent, and also, two VTJs is always better than one,
Yeah.
as the old saying goes. But I think here as well, yeah, you do have that where Holidays with the Hags, there's Seamus and Colin and Hannah. You've got the self-stirring cauldron, so it's quite easy to set up your board ready to go. And then as soon as you draw the VTJ or it pops itself into your graveyard, you've been given access to it. So yeah, it makes it a lot consistent, even, taking a few damage for a few turns, or having a couple creatures doing a few damage to you over a couple turns, because it does the searching for you. I'm pretty sure we'd say it's better to maybe spend 1 or 2 actions retrieving cards from your discard pile than it is spending 5 or 6 actions drawing for those cards. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, even advantageous to those decks that are looking for particular pieces at particular times.
Yeah, I thought it was just all really, really well put together. Justin did a great job of building that deck. Not happy to see another like combo deck winning, but it was a cool game.
And look, he may be his own downfall with this next set. We have a couple cards coming out, and I'm pretty sure
Yes.
he is responsible for designing one of them. So, yeah, he might be his own downfall there, but at least he got to win one tournament while he
That's
he
true.
could.
That's true. That's funny. Solid decks from both people. But let's pivot to talk about whatever our biggest takeaways from this tournament was. And you started talking before the podcast kind of about these 3 archetypes of decks that kind of make up the trifecta of this game, at least.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a very, very consistent show of those aggro creature decks. I think they're straightforward, easy to play for new players coming in, and quite consistent with the pressure they put on.
Mhm.
The VTJ sort of the combo decks in general, I think VTJ obviously being the poster child for them overall, but
Yes.
combo decks, and then character control. Character is obviously a favorite of most people. When
Yes.
you talk about Harry Potter, you may talk about like Hogwarts or wands, but really when you think of Harry Potter, you think of those 3 beautiful smiles from the main trio and a bunch of other characters along with them. So people love seeing their characters, and being cheap with the fact that they don't need lessons out to play makes them super easy to slot in anywhere.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we talked about it a couple of times, both recording and then not, but just kind of seeing these decks kind of take firm positions within the meta of the game and people continuing to kind of refine each of these. And then how we are seeing like strengths and a weakness in the dynamics of these 3 types of decks is also really cool to see kind of growing and becoming more firmer.
I think even before our last ban list, we had what I think a lot of people would call control. I'd say is maybe really it's more of a tempo thing, because the decks were playing a lot of aggro damage with mainly control on lessons, which I wouldn't really necessarily call control. I suppose there's contention in this. You definitely could argue the point, but I'd say you're taking your ability for your opponent to play cards, not choosing which cards they're playing. So it feels more like a prison or a tempo aspect of it. And then it always had creatures as the finisher or some larger damage piece to try and outpace your opponent. So even before the ban list, I could say aggro creatures sort of represented that idea as well. So yeah, those 3 have always been the mainstays of our meta.
Yeah.
I think another thing to mention, which again is very evident from what we've just talked about, is the diversity we've had since Goblet of Fire. I have been playing since 2022, I believe the May tournament even. So quite a few tournaments, and the diversity in like deck styles as well as the amount of cards being played has felt the most since these last 2 sets, or last 2 tournaments, especially I suppose the last 2 sets coming out, has been the most shake-up with a ban list there as well. Again, we have 9 players here, 8 different starters for one, but even the starter that's a duplicate is completely opposite decks.
Which was cool to see that they went in such different areas. And I agree. I do think since we started this 5 years ago, when Air Slytherin came out, I think the decks were still pretty much standard, like classic decks, with 1 or 2 additions that were Air Slytherin card. But for the most part, they pretty much were just standard classic decks. And I think POA kind of introduced some new things, but there just wasn't enough support. And it was still kind of like the standard decks. And then I think after that is when we had banned VTJ, because I think it was 2 years ago. And then we released Echoes of the Past. And VTJ ban list and Echoes of the Past, we started to see more diversity. And I think somebody brought like a Marauders deck, and like some tribal stuff started popping up. Some interesting builds with like Professor Hagrid started popping up. And that was a cool thing to start to see. But I think Goblet of Fire, maybe because of the size of it, maybe just because of the types of cards that were designed, I agree 100%. It's definitely led to the most diversity in terms of deck types. And that's really cool to see. And I hope that that can continue. I don't know how much the next set will like expand the diversity as much as strengthen a bunch of decks that currently exist. But I'm curious to see that.
Yeah, I think it's not slap you in the face obvious sort of impact that Goblet of Fire and Hogwarts of History have had, but most of the decks will have at least 1 or 2 cards from them that has, I think, made an impact by filling in gaps that they had that have just made them not work previously.
Yeah.
We've got Spew allowing new starters. We've got Madame Olymph. Trelawney has the Unicorn Foals and the Depulso. You've got Hogwarts of History is obviously now a pretty mainstay card. You know, a bunch of things coming through that are sort of just, this deck was maybe lacking this 1 or 2 pieces that it now has access to. So I think a lot of the diversity is probably come from that aspect of it. It's not there's now, 3 new starters, the power crept, run rampant staples of the format. It's more of, we've allowed things to get some support there that they didn't have previously. And I think the next set, maybe it won't do it to such an extent that Goblet of Fire particularly did, maybe, but I think there will be more there.
Yeah, and I think also as people get more comfortable with all of the different deck ideas and just the cards in general, and the more that they play, the more inventive they get, which is also just a super positive thing too.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that from the corridor with Hagrid and Hermione's Time Turner. Yeah, you can see that comfort is coming out of the players to start exploring new ideas, even in competitive settings. That's even emerged now. So I definitely agree. Whereas we as a community are getting more comfortable with the competitive aspect of cards and their interactions.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Overall, I thought it was a fun tournament. While I didn't really do much with my particular deck, it was cool again to see a lot of these and just really play games. That's why we're all here, is just to play games and have fun. And I think that was definitely accomplished.
It was good to see you play some games. And I think we'll just maybe end on a congratulations to you, Justin. I think maybe having the insider edge by being in the team now is a bit too much, and we'll kick you out after this set.
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
But with that, thank you everybody for playing in the tournament. We really appreciate that. There will be another tournament in probably the first half of May, so be on the lookout for that. And then after that, we are going to have a ban list update as well as a set release, so be on the lookout for that as well. And thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. Make sure you follow us on all of our socials linked below, and we'll chat with you in a couple of weeks. See ya.
See yas.